What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. A quick update for the Spawncast, as I am flattering everyone on the show, assuming they have something going on Valentine's Day around 6 o'clock. So instead, we're going to be doing the show tomorrow. Might be a live stream, might be pre-recorded, just kind of depends on everyone's schedule and we can sync all that up. So I guess keep an eye out tomorrow for a new episode of the Spawncast. But today, we actually have a lot to go over, which includes Sony beating expectations for their PlayStation 5 financials that covered Q3, that holiday time period. And it really shows right now just how strong of a position Sony is in currently with that PlayStation 5. We also have Avowed with reviews going live just ahead of early access, giving us a look at how Obsidian's latest offering is doing. And Nintendo continuing on the warpath in the courtroom with Palworld, this time though with some recent patent filings, shows that maybe they're bringing this whole thing to the States. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below. And we're going to start today with Astro, as we have more content coming to the game for free. And this has been a lot of fun to see this unfold because we just keep getting more and more content, more and more levels, more bots to unlock for this game. And in this case, we sort of had a sneak peek with that PlayStation tournament that took place because an Astrobot level we hadn't seen before was in there, and we figured, okay, maybe this is something happening in an update later on. Maybe we'll get one extra level. Well, no. Turns out we're getting 5 new levels. This over on PlayStation Blog. The first one is already available. That's TikTok Shock. I did play through it. It was a little more difficult than I was expecting. So I kind of like this, them leaning into it, even though the level itself is less than a minute long. It might be something you have to play a couple of times to beat it. Then February 20th, we have Thrust or Bust. February 27th, Cock-a-Doodle Doom. March 6th, Hard to Bear. And then March 13th, Armored Hardcore. There will be, at least from what I saw so far in TikTok Shock, that first one, a bot to unlock, and I assume we'll have a new bot each one. And it was actually pretty cool. I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but definitely play through it and get that bot added to your collection. But just a lot of fun to see more and more content going into the Astrobot game, and eventually they got to put that Game of the Year trophy in there somewhere, right? Also, I did just talk about Remedy yesterday and how Alan Wake 2 has not only broken even, but is now actually making money. It also seems that Remedy is giving us an indication as to their plans going forward into 2030 with their game releases. This we can see posted up. This is over on Twisted Voxel as the image that was shared seemingly with investors, with Remedy targeting a 2027 release window for Control 2, followed by, we can see Alan Wake 3, and then Control 3. So Alan Wake 3 is targeting 2029, and then Control 3 is 2030. It seems odd to be telling us about Control 3 now before Control 2 is out. So, I mean, that's a 3-year window there, I guess. And the fact that it's so far out with Control 3, that could just be kind of an estimate and it could still miss and be, okay, 2031 or 32, especially since we're still expecting like Max Payne 1 and 2, for example, although that would be left up to Rockstar and Take-Two to figure out when exactly that's coming out. Remedy is just doing most of the development around that game. But yeah, it seems like Remedy, of course, being all in on the universe that they've created here, with Control and Alan Wake being the big focuses here over the next 5 or 6 years. Oh, and we had another GameCube mention here for the Switch 2 now. We can see this over on VGC. They say the original artist behind Star Fox says he hopes Star Fox Assault will be ported to Switch 2. Now, this was mentioned, as they say, on around the 20th anniversary, right, of the game, that being February 13th, as they had here posted. And, I'm looking at this thinking, okay, you could see a remaster of it or something, but to me, this fits in perfectly, like a Star Fox Assault, with the idea that GameCube games would go to NSO with the Switch 2, which would be a good addition for a service that probably is going to be getting more expensive here with the next generation, that being that subscription service with Nintendo and their expansion pack. And then you would open the door to games that maybe aren't, in Nintendo's mind, worth doing a full remaster treatment or port treatment for, but could just be dropped in to add more value to their overall subscription service that might be like $70 a year or something like that, with the addition of GameCube games. There are many they can, of course, tap, and I think Star Fox Assault is a perfect one for them to look into. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Sony and their recent financial report for Q3 or fiscal year Q3. That covers the holiday period, so October, November, and December. And expectations around this were maybe a little less than they did last year, considering we thought we had sort of hit the high point for PlayStation 5 sales, and that they would slowly start to decline somewhat here, whether it's year over year or just the holiday period. And while it still might be year over year, it certainly wasn't this recent holiday period, because they actually hit kind of like a high watermark here in general. So let's start though with the hardware. And we can see the PlayStation 5 sold 9.5 million units. Okay, that's versus last year's Q3, which is 8.2, and that does put the PlayStation 5 currently lifetime at 75 million units shipped. That's 1.5 million behind the PlayStation 4 launch lines, and we're going to come back to that because I think at this time, kind of really looking at these numbers now and sort of revising my thoughts around its lifetime sales, I kind of think right now the PS5 will actually outsell the PS4, which again, I'll come back to the reasoning on that one. As for the monthly active users, we can see they hit 129 million users. That is, as we can see, a 6 million user jump over last year's Q3. The interesting thing about all of this, think about the conversation right now with Sony after that state of play and how people are wondering where the PlayStation games are and stuff. Well, if you look at Q3 this past year versus last year's Q3, less first-party games, but more software sales in general, the third-party games, of course, really holding things up, but then also more system sales. Now, I think this, of course, goes into Sony doing some pretty good discounts for Black Friday that have obviously helped to move a lot of hardware, but I think this also plays into what we're seeing with Sony currently, which is that they are becoming the default high-end console box that you would buy, the PlayStation 5. We see Microsoft pulling back more and more on their hardware when it comes to marketing and discounts and just trying to get it into people's homes, and they're more doubling down on the idea of even just shipping their games on the PlayStation 5. So sure, lack of competition is playing into it, but also Sony just being extremely aggressive still to get PlayStation 5 consoles out there, maybe to make up for some of the earlier issues, the bottlenecks they had with the supply chain problems and not being able to get out stock immediately, so that they can set things up and maybe even get ahead of the PlayStation 4. Now, when it comes to their overall revenue, they hit a new all-time high. Derek Strickland made a good graph here to kind of visualize this easily on screen for you guys, just over $11 billion in revenue. Easily beat the previous Q3 holiday period, and as I mentioned, driven by a strong $3.8 billion in hardware sales. Now, the only issue with that, because hardware sales were such a large chunk, well, that means that the operating income or the profit, not necessarily the highest. Okay, so about 7%. And yes, technically that's going to be down from many of the previous years, but technically the 7% of a larger number, you can still see it compares very favorably, not necessarily percentage-wise, but just in terms of raw dollars. Along with the reports here, Sony did have a call with investors and a bunch of PowerPoint slides and stuff to show off. They also did raise their overall forecast for sales and operating income. So yes, even Sony themselves were, I don't want to say caught off guard, but pleasantly surprised with some of the results that they had here. Now, one in particular was kind of interesting, a slide, user engagement. So they show the PlayStation 5 purchasers for Q3 fiscal 24, so again, this past holiday time period. And the overall chart there on the left with that pie graph, we have users who newly connected a PS5 to the PlayStation Network, but then also new users there, the orange slice, are users who created a new PlayStation Network account at the time of connection. So unless 42% of people had their entire MAC address for the system banned along with their account, and they had to buy a new system and then make a new account, we're most likely looking at a large number of people coming into the PlayStation ecosystem for the first time with the purchase of that PlayStation 5. And again, I think that plays into how aggressive Sony was with some of the pricing and the Black Friday sales that they did over the holidays, just working to get more and more new users into the ecosystem on board with the PlayStation 5. And that actually continues along here when you look at just overall user engagement. They were up 5%. And if you look at 42% of the overall number that was pushed here, as they mentioned 9.5 million PlayStation 5 systems, That actually lines up almost perfectly with the 5 to 6 million more active users here that were reported. So overall, a great quarter here for Sony with that report. And the reason now I'm looking at this as, okay, I think they're going to jump ahead of the PlayStation 4 as soon as this holiday season. While it's not even because of a first-party game that Sony themselves will release, it's still in the cards. And that's Grand Theft Auto 6. And I know I've talked about this a lot, and people are like, oh, is it? I know it's going to do well. It's going to have that kind of effect. Well, it's not going to be on PC, apparently, for the first year or so, we believe. So it's going to release to really a couple of high-end boxes, we'll say high-end boxes, Xbox and PlayStation 5. And right now, the default system is the PlayStation 5, so we believe it will get a large number of systems that are pushed out there along with the game. Now, it also comes down to, will Sony be prepared? Will they also be aggressive with discounts around the PlayStation 5 to go alongside of GTA 6? There are question marks here, but the fact that they are now 1.5 million units behind the PS4, and it seems like it doesn't necessarily matter if they push out first-party games or not. Like, people are still just buying the system. Maybe it's on brand recognition. Maybe it is on third-party games that they want to play and they're just going to the PS5. Or maybe it's recommendations from their friends who bought into the PS5 a year or two ago, or even just recently, as we see with this Q3 new user report. I mean, that's just kind of that cascading effect, and this is kind of something where I think we will see it to basically snowball as we get towards GTA 6. We'll see if it comes out this year, but if it hits holiday 2025, GTA 6, and the PlayStation 5 up there on store shelves, I fully expect it to jump ahead of the PS4, and I think GTA 6 will have an effect on PS5 sales for bare minimum 1.5 years, maybe even 2 full years. And I think that's eventually how we see the system completely outsell the PS4 and Sony to be rolling along in a very odd-looking generation where the typical bell graph doesn't line up anymore. So that is going to be something to watch. But right now, yeah, Sony's rolling, and it looks like they are building that lead on Xbox pretty much quarter over quarter. Next up, let's talk about Avowed, that is now out in early access. Otherwise, though, if you're waiting for it to hit Game Pass, just like regular pricing, that would be next week on February 18th. But for now, we can see over on Metacritic, currently sitting at an 80. That's on 60 critic reviews. The PC has 50 critic reviews. That's sitting at a 79. We have 48 positive, 12 mixed. And I was going through trying to just kind of grab different ends of the spectrum here. So like Xbox Era, as an example, gave it an 8.8 out of 10, saying that it's an excellent game, but one major issue keeps it from being an all-timer, with the gear progression system being as restrictive as it is at launch. Say they can patch that and hope that they do, as the rest of the game is excellent. Obsidian's top-tier writing has finally been matched with gorgeous visuals and satisfying gameplay. Gaming Nexus gave it an 8 out of 10, saying while balanced in a way that forces players to experience almost everything the game has to offer, Avowed is still a lot of fun. A great story, fun companions, and a richly designed world all contribute to an overall good time. Just remember to take your time early on, because this game wants you to see everything and it will punish you for trying to skip ahead. That sounds pretty ominous, actually. VGC gave it a 4 out of 5, or as Metacritic likes to show it off here as an 8 out of 10. Avowed is a solid action RPG with an entertaining script, satisfying combat, and impressively detailed environments. The inability to clean up side quests after the main story is beaten can be frustrating, so I guess there is that point of no return that you'll come across. So that, yeah, I don't know. I kind of like the idea of, sure, it might be kind of weird because it's like, hey, you just beat the final boss and freed the world, but you know what? If you want to go back and do the side quest, we'll still drop you back in the world afterwards. I still like that, because especially for achievement hunters or something, you probably don't want to have to play all the way back through the game and then stop right before that point of no return. So I guess save scum like crazy then. IGN with a 7 out of 10. Yeah, that makes sense. Avowed is a perfectly competent RPG that showcases Obsidian's writing, world-building chops, but has little else to distinguish itself among swords and sorcery adventures. And then GameSpot was on the lower end of the spectrum here, 6 out of 10. Avowed's impactful and satisfying combat is undone by a widely unbalanced upgrade system and an uninteresting story that wastes its potential. So I guess they weren't feeling it then. Now, Nate and I were getting together to discuss Avowed, as he has had a chance to play it for a little while now ahead of its release, and that Direct Xbox should be coming out later on today, so keep an eye out for that one over on the Spawncast channel. As for Avowed, I think I'm just going to go ahead and grab it when it comes out normally on Game Pass next week on the 18th, and then the following weekend for the podcast, I'll give some of my thoughts on it, as that's kind of where I am right now with Avowed. Like, I'm interested, but I'm not running up to it like I gotta play this right now. It looks like a fine action RPG from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, and for right now, with Microsoft's push for like a decent release cadence with all their games, I think that's going to fit in nicely for them with their Game Pass offerings in 2025. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Nintendo and Palworld. As we know, Nintendo has moved to sue for patent infringement with Palworld, that being in Japan, but now some patents are being spotted that is making people think that Nintendo could be bringing that entire lawsuit, or at least a lawsuit, stateside as well. We can see this posted up. This is over on Nintendo Life. It says, as reported by GamesFray, Nintendo has had 3 patent applications approved in the US in recent months. In fact, they've had one every single month, seemingly, for the past 3, so December, January, and February. 2 of them were filed after Palworld's launch, and specifically detail creature catching mechanics. Another Nintendo US patent, as listed here, which was actually filed back in September 2024, but was recently rejected by the Patent Office on 22 of the applicant's 23 claims, and the final claim, which seemingly relates to switching out creatures that you can ride, was merely objected to. Now, I did see this story reported as like 22 of 23 patents that were denied. No, claims in general in a patent are just kind of pointing out different, trying to describe different things in terms of maybe gameplay. And it's actually very common for companies to keep trying to push some of these patents through by, yes, bombarding with all kinds of claims. One being objected to means that Nintendo should be able to take it back and rewrite it. So you try to skirt this line where you can't be too specific to the mechanic, somewhat vague, but close enough to where you can technically sue over patent infringement. That's the game Nintendo is trying to play here. We've mentioned it before, Nintendo ruthless in the courtroom. This is just kind of showing off that aspect of them. And it's funny, I really don't hear people talk about Palworld much at all, but because of how slow moving the courtroom is, I mean, yeah, we're going to be talking about this thing, I'm sure, going throughout this year, most likely even into 2026, depending on how messy the whole situation gets. So yeah, Nintendo most likely, it seems, going to be bringing this even stateside as these US patents are being set up right now, I guess, to build their case. It's still weird to me when you hear that some of them are being filed after Palworld has come out. But that's just, again, Nintendo playing the game there. And I know it's been back and forth contentious online as to if Nintendo should be doing this or not. Palworld was incredibly successful. Nintendo, yeah, they might have felt threatened by it, and that's just kind of the course of action here for them to go, especially with Palworld even looking into the transmedia aspect, where maybe they would try to have an anime and like comics and manga and merchandise and all kinds of stuff. So we'll see how this one plays out, and if Nintendo does eventually issue a statement that they are continuing their lawsuit not only in Japan, but also in the US. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, have you played Star Fox Assault before? Wow, 73% say no, 27% say yes. Actually, that shouldn't be too surprising. I mean, look, Star Fox Assault, I mean, you kind of had to be there with the GameCube back then, and it was like towards the end of the GameCube's life, technically. I mean, 20 years ago, we're going into 2005. It's not like the GameCube was, while they were getting good games at this point, people had already kind of made their decision as to where they were going with their console purchase, or they already had a PS2, which took over the majority of the user base at that time. We all know this. And Star Fox Assault does seem like one of those Star Fox games that I don't think slipped through the cracks, but it doesn't get talked about much at all compared to like Star Fox 64 as an example, even Star Fox on the Super Nintendo, even kind of Star Fox Adventure now I think about it, but that might be because that was such a different take or experience for the Star Fox franchise. So I think it would be kind of cool to see Star Fox Assault come back in some way. And the easiest path forward, I think, for it would be having NSO have that GameCube section and that be a part of it. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Zeph, who says, I don't normally get excited for remasters, but I'll be picking up Days Gone. I really enjoyed the original game, and even my wife was glued to the screen with the story. It would be awesome if there was enough interest for Sony to greenlight a sequel. So, for a while, we figured it was Sony who turned down the Days Gone sequel. It made sense to a lot of us, because Days Gone, while it didn't come out of the gate with great reviews, it was buggy at launch. That was part of it, sure. But it did eventually get patched up to where it's a competent game. People do like it. It sold well. It's like, what, 7 or 8 million copies sold or something, and then it did well on PC too. So I'm kind of looking at that thinking it makes sense financially to take another shot at that franchise. The problem is, we learned later on that it wasn't necessarily Sony who shot it down. It didn't even get to Sony as a pitch from Ben because internally they decided not to pitch it to Sony. And I do wonder if there's more to that story in the sense that maybe the development wasn't great for them and they didn't want to go through all of that a second time to do a sequel. But now, after where they are currently with that live service game being canceled, maybe it is time to go back to the well and see, hey, I mean, the remaster's happening now. It'll be there on the PS5, and while it wouldn't be ready for 4 or 5 years, might not be a bad way to get things going with the PlayStation 6. Days Gone 2. We'll see if Ben Studio wants to attempt that, and then, of course, we'll see if Sony wants to greenlight it. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card, or maybe you want to hear more about Nate's thoughts around Avowed, I'll leave that video link below it when it goes live later today. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.